Okay, hello. Welcome back to the latest episode of ADHD Generations. Obviously, I've got my lovely co-host and mum, Esther, or mum, with me today. And we have our lovely guest, Anita Patel. So would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm, as you've just said, Anita Patel, and it's really great to be here. I will probably end up talking a bit more about sort of my background and what I do now, which will give you an idea of a bit more about me. So I won't bother with any sort of title or short intro for now.
No problem.
Yeah.
So, on that note, can we hear a little bit about your background and kind of what's brought you to this place where you are now in terms of your work, but maybe some other things too?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's brought me to this podcast specifically is definitely our friendship, Esther, and the fact that we work together. And when you said you want to be on my podcast, of course, it was a yes,
Thank you.
without any further questions asked. But yeah, in terms of the work specifically and what's brought me to where I am now. So my background started off in education, as you know, Esther, and there I was able to see firsthand how neurodivergent pupils in particular are supported. So where it all begins really. And during my teaching years, I received a cancer diagnosis. I'm fine now. But that definitely led to me rethinking what it was that I wanted to do. And some of that was due to the treatment that I was put on, which meant actually working for myself would be more conducive to the recovery and then sort of discovering other things about myself. And so that flexibility was needed. So I started by gaining a diploma in coaching whilst I was recovering from burnout. So yeah, that's kind of how things go in my life. And then I actually I did come across neurodiversity specific training, which I thought it was really important to kind of to have. And then in addition to this, I was mentoring neurodivergent students at the University of Leicester. And during our sessions, a lot of the time they would say things like, "You really get this. You're very much like me. I feel like you've actually lived this." All those kinds of things that were making me think about myself. And they said it was almost like holding a mirror up. So I thought, well, because of that, I'm going to have to do some digging and some exploring. And I think it was probably missed for me because I now realize I've done many years of masking, people pleasing. And so I think I kind of just didn't show really any of the signs to close people, to loved ones, to friends. And then once I started making it my absolute project to figure out everything there was to know about this and how it is for girls and women in particular, I soon realized. And so as part of that discovery, I started working with people late diagnosed or late discovered individuals, doing one-to-one coaching. I then received a formal diagnosis of autism and ADHD. So ADHD, which then made so much sense about everything in my life. You see it all through a different lens, and you go through that whole process of how did I manage, and actually, well done for managing. So there's like a combination of the two. And I really started to understand the push pull that exists in my life and what comes with having, the combined neurotype. And then started to reflect upon all of those years of being misdiagnosed, as we know, all of that made sense. And I think as I started to find myself again, felt that I was fully recovered, that the treatment side effects had lessened a little bit. I decided, right, I'm going to start my own business. It's never too late, and I think that's such a key message that you can change direction. You
Yeah.
can do what really serves you. I love this book, Ikigai. I really feel like I found my Ikigai, my passion, purpose, path. And so I moved away from just one-to-one coaching to working with organizations, delivering sessions on neuro inclusion, but specifically with an intersectionality focus. And so now it's working with companies in different settings, sectors, as well as healthcare and education. And I absolutely love it. And Esther and I have a course as well, a CPD accredited course now for client-facing practitioners. So all of that combined feels like I have arrived. You know, I'm where I'd really like to be, albeit in my late 40s.
Well, you know, I didn't get to where I was meant to be until my mid 50s, although I did love my previous work and everything I'd done for the 25 years before that in education. But you're right, it's never too late, or almost never too early either. It's kind of always the right time, really, if you take advantage of it. Can I ask you something about a word you used a little while ago? We were talking about you were talking about diagnosis, and you used the word discovery. Tell me a little bit more about how you use that word discovery.
Yeah, I think it's so important to consider that it's really a process. That, you know, when you think of a formal diagnosis, for example, there are so many barriers in terms of accessing one, as we know. So whether it's waiting lists, whether it's cultural barriers that stop you from seeking that out, whether it's financial barriers if you're seeking a private sort of route. So all of that combined, I think it sort of feels like a diagnosis, whilst it's great. And I did receive one for myself. And it's certainly something that I personally felt I needed for different reasons. The discovery process allowed it to feel less fixed, less a piece of paper, here you go, and off you go, but more the kind of process that leads up to it, the process afterwards of understanding yourself. It just feels like there's more room, there's more flexibility to consider what that means, and then less pressure on people who don't have it in a formal sense. And so they feel they can still access the support that they need.
I love that, because it feels like discovery takes the medical element out of it as well, doesn't it? Right. We talk in our professions, we talk about neurotypes, don't we? And neuro-affirming language and all the ways that we try, you know, is still somewhat medical because of having a diagnosis and some of us being medicated and so on. But on the other hand, if we're accepting that we're a neurotype, or often more than one neurotype, the word discovery feels like it's less judgment, less medical, and more like, oh, this is who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the whole neurodiversity movement is trying to shift away from the medical deficit based approach, as we know, and that's really becoming sort of neuro affirming, not just including and accepting, but one step away from that, and really embracing different thinking styles.
Yeah, I love that. Which is why I just wanted to just highlight that word that you used, because it was just such a lovely way. I often say to people, Anita says it's discovery, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that's great.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you. And it's definitely a term that I like to use with people that I work with as well, because I think there are sometimes connotations around self-diagnosis as well, or self-identifying. It kind of just the whole how you perceive that, and then the types of questions that people ask you as a result of it, as a result, was when you, I think when you say discovery, they sort of go, "Ooh, tell me more." Kind of adopt a curious approach rather than a judgmental approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's been some bad press recently. We're in April 2025 now, and there's been some bad press recently about, you know, everybody says they've got ADHD, and there was a standard an Evening Standard article, wasn't there? And so the idea that we're discovering something as opposed to creating it, or do you know what I mean? It's like a thing that exists and we've found it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel like I've found the true essence of who I am through this process.
So talking of the true essence of who you are, tell us more about the kind of intersectionality elements of your work, because it's such an interesting perspective that you come from.
Thank you. Yeah, that I'm really passionate about it. I think for me, so to start off really with a definition of what intersectionality means, and there will be different variations in terms of specific wording, but intersectionality for me is really acknowledging that everyone has their own unique experiences, and we must consider anything that can marginalize people. So, whether this is gender, race, age, physical health, and so many other identities, it's probably less what those identities are, but it's how that person is made to feel about them.
Mm.
Right. So I think that really sort of resonated with me when I was having a discussion with someone about this recently, that, you know, me being, for example, a South Asian woman who is neurodivergent and recovering from cancer, those things in themselves shouldn't be problematic.
Mm.
But it's how I've been made to feel about them because they are taboo and stigma topics in my community, for example, and because of the perceptions towards them, that's made me feel more marginalized. And that's probably led to me masking further and not being able to reveal all parts of myself. So I think considering how intersectionality impacts us is really important. So how it impacts, for example, our access to support, our access to certain bits of information, and also self-advocacy. You know, so if you're asking someone to request some adjustments at work, they may not know how to because they've spent so many years concealing, and then they've got additional kind of shame and guilt and things that may be specific to their community. And so that needs to be considered when we're providing support, just to kind of make it more tailored to the individual.
So how can we help people when it comes to intersectionality? You know, you mentioned that you're a South Asian woman, that you're kind of you have been a cancer patient in the past. You're a neurodivergent person. For people watching this video, what can we do about it? If you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely do. And I know that the two of you are definitely, you know, very sort of proactive in this space. And so it's great to be able to have these conversations about ADHD and or neurodiversity coaching specifically, and how we can tailor that. And I think more than anything to consider what is happening during the session. So digging a little bit deeper and knowing what to look for. So for example, the level of masking, you know, is there more going on because this person is also contending with some perceptions in their family or community, for example, and that's made it harder for them to share certain things during the session? Or is it to do with their willingness to talk about specific aspects of their lives? So, ones that they have maybe kind of different feelings towards. So, segmenting those out, and actually, it might not all merge into one. You know, that if they talk about their family life, it might be different. Workplace challenges, that could be seen through a different lens. And let's say you're looking at, you know, I know Esther, you're, and I'm sure Lewis as well, we try to move away from the traditional approaches and the kind of goal setting and, you know, making it prescriptive, and making sure we're more flexible for neurodivergent individuals. But I think for those who have those multiple identities, if we really are looking at intersectionality, we need to almost take it one step further. So with that flexibility in our approach to cater for needs, we need to then have that enhanced understanding of what that person might be encountering on a daily basis. And it could be, for example, when I had to tell some family members about myself, you know, very, very mixed responses. because in the South Asian community, in Black communities, Chinese communities, and others, there is this feeling that anything to do with whether it's neurodivergence or mental health or even some physical health aspects, they are seen as kind of less than. They're seen as, mostly kind of deficit based. They're not going to contribute to success, for example. So in my community, there's a strong emphasis on academic performance or choosing certain career paths. So, when I tell people what I do, it's kind of, oh, okay, that's nice. Whereas when I was a teacher, that was understood.
Yeah.
That was, a structured kind of logical path which had sort of linear progression. And so what I do now, every day is different and anything's possible, which I absolutely love, but it's not necessarily regarded in the same way. So that might be worth factoring in when you're supporting someone who's from a particular community and they are exploring an alternative career path. They may have additional feelings towards that.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because when we're working with somebody from other intersectionalities and other communities, I'm thinking of some things like gender identity or, particular backgrounds in terms of social status or something along those lines. I really encourage people to learn about trauma-informed coaching as well, for example. So the idea of intersectionality is that the person is a whole person and they have a number of elements that are coming into making them who they are, which are absolutely unique to them. Hence your beautiful sweatshirt today.
Yes. I thought this has to hopefully this will reflect what we're trying to achieve. I don't know where did I come across this sweatshirt? It was actually at an airport.
Oh.
And I thought there was one left. I thought this is a sign. This is literally embodying what you're trying to achieve. And what you said, Esther, was so true, that it's kind of the human side. We are each of us individual and unique. And yes, those multiple identities are not labels per se.
No.
That doesn't mean people have to treat us differently, but it's acknowledging that they are kind of what shape us as a human, as a person going through things on a daily basis. And what does good understanding and support look like?
Yeah, I love that, because if we only say we're called ADHD coaches, we run an ADHD coach training course, but if we only look at ADHD, we're missing probably three-quarters of the story. So working with the whole person.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk a lot about this, don't we, Esther and Lewis? I'm sure you come across this as well with the people that you work with, the kind of the co-occurrence side of things, the combined neurotypes, the additional sort of layers to see that holistically. And I think that's why we're so passionate about sort of that, when we talk about being neuro affirming, we see everything alongside, because it may be that that individual doesn't even realize they have an additional or co-occurring neurotype or other things going on. And again, that can also be a discovery at a later stage where you sort of see, oh, okay, but I believed this was the case. Now I'm seeing that this is, and that might be a reason why some things are not, in inverted commas, working. So kind of certain strategies that you've looked at together, which in themselves would be quite conducive to one particular neurotype, such as ADHD. If there are additional things happening, it may be that their efficacy is kind of different. And so we need to look at maybe a different approach to see if we can cater for that, as I said before, that push-pull. We all know, right? On some days this works well, on other days it really doesn't. So
I'm just wondering, and it's occurred to me that we can access training around different neurotypes. We can access training about gender identity or, trauma and some of the other things that are coming in. How can we learn more about different cultural backgrounds that we might come across in our coaching room. So you mentioned South Asian community, you mentioned Chinese community, Black communities, and so on. You know, in the UK, we're likely to have all sorts of different people coming into our coaching rooms, and we know where we can find some information about some backgrounds, but how can we find out more about the communities that you mentioned there? Is there a way? Maybe it doesn't exist. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really good point to consider, because I feel like we're definitely seeing a shift towards considering intersectional aspects that focus on gender, for example. You know, so we're starting to cater for that a lot more, and we're seeing, okay, who's missed out of those conversations? And you'll find lots of resources and support around this. You'll find organizations doing this, you know, like the Autistic Girls Network and others. I know that the National Autistic Society, for example, and I know ADHD UK and some others, they are starting to bring in those voices.
Yeah.
And I think that it's also filtering through to healthcare settings. So, you know, looking at diagnostic criteria, how can we change that? So that's all the stuff that you know you can look for and you'll hopefully find. With this area, I think it's very much a case of you have to dig deep, you know, deep on a deeper level. You have to really find, there could be particular collectives, for example, who are working on this, and a lot of them are on places like social media. You've got Black Sen Mamas, for example, and there's somebody there who heads that up and specifically works with Black families who have neurodivergent children who are they are caring for or supporting. You have some other collectives. There's a autistic community collective set up for the Chinese community specifically, but interestingly, I haven't come across anything specifically for the South Asian community. And I have been looking, so that is something that I'm definitely thinking about. But steps that can be taken before that are representation. So if we are seeing more people like myself, for example, talking about it on a wider scale, which is why I do the speaking side as well, that will create a ripple effect, because people will see, you know, she's talking about her neurodivergence and she's successful. You know, the both can exist together, right? So the more that you see of that, you see it at that level, and you see safe spaces being created. So I have just come across something on LinkedIn, a group called Brown and Neurodivergent. So that was quite a recent thing, and I've become part of that. But that, again, we want to keep the momentum going. We want to actually create a space where people can come and sort of share their experiences.
Because from what you've said about the South Asian community, and I think I'm understanding that you're saying that maybe there's not so much acceptance as you would like. Maybe there are fewer people who are coming through from those communities to be sharing their experiences. So I can sort of envisage a situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, where just a few people, that the whole kind of responsibility for representing the community is on the shoulders of a very few people who are kind of brave enough to speak out.
That's spot on. This is why we get along so well, Esther. Like, you just speak to me, you know exactly where I'm coming from. That's it. That is pretty much what happens, and that can be a lot sometimes.
Yeah,
you're almost carrying the weight of this sort of this change that needs to happen, but you know, you recognize that there are just a few of you. So there is somebody who I have got in touch with recently, and we feel that there is scope to make this happen. But I think there's always that sense of, how public can I go? So yeah, I've done a podcast, which was a big thing for me to talk about. I talked about my my late discovery and my experience there around a year ago. But again, that is not necessarily something that is going to be seen by everyone. If I am coming and talking about it on here, or if I'm delivering bits of training within the intersectionality focus, that is still a kind of a restricted audience, so to speak. You know, what we want to try and get to a stage of is speaking on a very wide scale, and not just in these communities, in the communities who are interested in neurodiversity and neurodivergence specifically, but in a wider sense. We're talking about how all of these taboo and stigma topics really should be seen in a different way. So I think, I think you mentioned this previously, Esther, sometimes it's an echo chamber. And,
That was the word.
yeah. And that's it. You're sort of, it's going back and forth within that, but who does it really need to reach? Right. And so it's the people who are seeing you talking about this as being sort of unconventional and not okay. And therefore that might impact how involved you are in something, or your chance of promotion, or your chance of being accepted and being invited to that thing, or whatever that looks like. That sort of stuff needs to change.
Well, we're working on it, aren't we? Together, which is lovely. And it's so lovely that the ADHD community is inclusive of everybody, of all the intersectionalities that you've talked about. We are, and I don't mean just the ADHD community, I mean the wider neurodiversity community. And our advocates and allies, we're so inclusive. We kind of make great efforts to be inclusive, which is a good start. But I know sometimes, Anita, you talk about the global majority. Tell us a little bit more about that phrase, because it's such a useful one to bear in mind, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you brought that up, actually, because I feel like that is a term which is more accurate in terms of where we are. So historically, ethnic minority was used, and that in itself comes with connotations. Just the word minority, and actually we form part of the global majority, because if you look at the world and you look across the globe at all of these communities that we're referring to, we actually form the global majority. So it's kind of looking at it in an international sense, not just what we see in the UK, for example.
Just define we there for us, Anita. We are the global majority. Who's we?
So, for example, in that it would be the South Asian community, it would be Black communities, it would be Chinese communities. We're coming together. Any community that you may have seen as, when they refer to ethnic minority or marginalized, actually it's flipping that over and saying, well, there are this many across the world, so we have to include them in conversations. They can't be left out, because it would be, you're essentially leaving out a majority rather than a minority.
So if you're talking about a village of 5,000 people, that's very different to talking about the 7 billion people on the planet in terms of majority, minority, and ratios of people's cultural backgrounds and ethnicities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, we are global now. It's very hard to keep everything within your little village anymore.
Yeah, that's it. And we've spoken about this, haven't we, Esther? We've had inquiries from people all over the world about some of the stuff that we do. And certainly with me being from the South Asian community, I've been quite interested in talking to people who are based in India, for example, and the things that they are doing there, where they're trying to create a shift away from, my child is broken. They need fixing, they need sorting out, to actually look at all the amazing things that this brings. So yeah, absolutely looking at it on a wider scale.
I love that. So just talking about the global majority, that's one thing that all of us can do to help bring about the kind of new ways of looking at neurodiversity and neurodivergence and intersectionality and all of those other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
These conversations. No, thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome. It just occurred to me as we were going along,
Love that.
So tell us a little bit more about, back to the coaching again. So we'll kind of focus a little bit on the coaching, just because it's something that we all do. How can we've talked on the wider scale, we've talked about various different, how we can see intersectionality, what it means. How can we then bring that into our practice, whether we're coaches or any other any other client facing person, I guess?
Yeah, so I think for us to really consider that, what would a neuro affirming session look like in the first instance? So, we know that we have to move away from prescriptive models, for example, be more flexible, be more adaptable, recognize, when other feelings are sort of occurring within the session, and that might impact things. Catering for different communication preferences, and all of those sorts of good practice things. But then one step away from that is very much to kind of consider that person's cultural reference. So mentions that have been made of kind of things that happen in the family, for example, things that, it could be an event that's been attended, and the expectations surrounding that, which exist in South Asian communities, hosting things on a large level, like the bigger the better, and so that was really hard for me, to be able to have to cook for this many people and then host them as well. Was just, now I can kind of be more, I can be truer to myself and say, well, look, it's about really seeing each other. So the cooking part is not that important. We'll get takeaway and we'll all just spend time together and it will be fine, right? So the expectations around things that have happened maybe on a social level, so events that have occurred, the impact that that's had. We know how important energy accounting is for neurodivergent individuals. So how many withdrawals took place because of that, because of what happened on that day, or if it's a wedding, over 4 or 5 days in our communities. And then there's the whole sort of, what does it look like in terms of your support network? So was your support network more accessible before you started disclosing these things about yourself? Is it now no longer an option? So, some, as I mentioned before, some families may have, we talk about it takes a village. And yes, if all goes according to plan, you will have a really good network in my community, for example. So I'm Gujarati. I'm from, I am a South Asian, but within that specifically, I'm Gujarati. And we're known for sort of coming, as is the Punjabi community as well. We're known for sort of coming together and saying, right, what do we need to do? And let's tackle this. Let's tackle this, all of us, and let's do it all. But that may not be the case if you're disclosing that actually, you've got children who don't quite fit the mold. You yourself don't quite fit the mold. How is that going to then impact what that support looks like? Will it be as readily available? So that in turn will impact your sessions. If you are receiving coaching, for example, that might create an effect that you're not even aware of. Because you've been shunned by individuals who you could rely on historically. That's now shifted. And another aspect could be, for example, if you are exploring different options, different creative options of things that you might want to try and do, and you might want to change direction for. Again, as a coach, you might be that those things might be met with more resistance, not because that individual doesn't want to, they'd love to, but they know how it's going to be perceived.
So there's something there about a coach or a person, any client facing person, but we'll talk about coaches for the sake of this, not making assumptions about what's going on for their client, in terms of not making assumptions about what support they might have, not making assumptions about how easy or difficult it might be to try out a strategy, or what's happening in their wider circle, family and friends around them, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That key word, not the assumptions part, is so important, because that will then shape a lot of what we're trying to achieve. You know, asking maybe a different set of questions.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've supported some individuals who we talked about maybe find a quiet, focused space, and they'd sort of turn around and say, well, you know, I have unexpected guests pretty much every other day. So how do I do that? And so, you know, we have very much in our family, we've had to sort of throw that out of the window and sort of go, look, unexpected doorbell rings don't work for us. Please let us know if you're coming. You know, it's like we will probably not answer the door if we haven't factored that into our plan, you know, as a family in terms of what we're trying to do. So things like that, I think to understand those cultural nuances is really important.
Yeah,
Definitely.
so I could just imagine your whole family hiding behind the sofa with the lights off. I just
You're not far off the mark. I mean, the Ring doorbell was literally the best thing for neurodivergent families, I think.
Definitely.
This is like an endorsement I didn't even know I was going to make. So there we go.
Ring doorbells. So I just feel like we're coming a little bit towards the end now. So the key message there, just to reiterate, is don't make assumptions. As a coach or another person working with somebody from any kind of community, don't make assumptions about that community and the person's background and their situation and their context. Ask questions. And as coaches, that's what we do, is ask questions, isn't it? But remember to ask questions if you're in any doubt at all, or even if you're not in any doubt. Just be very curious, not judgmental, which is what we always say in coaching, isn't
Ted
it?
Lasso, woo.
Yes, Ted Lasso.
I love Ted Lasso.
Oh, it's so
We
good.
all love Ted Lasso.
It's a beautiful, beautiful show.
So good. Yeah, absolutely, all of those things. And I think as well, hearing from people.
Yes.
So if you are able to come across different experiences, so wherever I do my kind of sessions or conversations, I'll make reference to intersectionality, but being as exposed as possible to different voices means that we can then gain that wider understanding, because we've kind of we make those connections, don't we? We sort of go, well, actually they made reference to that. It's interesting because I remember when I spoke about the hosting, someone got in touch and said, wow, you've given me the green light now to say no. He said, I can be more boundaried now and it's okay. So yeah, you know, a teacher in our coaching sessions, we might also need to recognize the concept of boundaries and what that looks like for someone.
Absolutely. I can see that we've only got a couple of minutes left, so thank you for that. Just tell us before we go what any plans you have in the coming months.
Yeah, so I think continuing to work with individuals and organizations on creating neuro-affirming support and spaces, delivering sessions with an intersectionality focus, and then thinking about other settings like healthcare and education where this is very much needed. You know, we're still seeing so many statistics that point towards not having that understanding, and, you know, individuals being either not supported in the way we'd like them to be supported, or having to opt out, or being excluded, you know, altogether, whether it's in a school sense, literally being excluded, or if we're talking about healthcare, being sectioned when, you know, there's a deeper understanding that's needed. So continuing to work on that. And then, obviously the course that we've got for client-facing practitioners, we've got some cohorts coming up for that. And of course, speaking at events such as the ADHD Coaching Conference, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, that's not far off. So all of those things, and I'm sure more as well.
Yes. Who knows what's going to happen? And when we come together like this and work together and produce things and put ourselves out there, at least the load is a little bit more shared.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
You're amazing.
As are you, and thank you so much for having me.
It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, and everyone watching, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.
Bye.